Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in for today's Tech Takes Live in the Console series, where each month we showcase one of 1111's technology solutions. Today I'll be walking you through disaster recovery in the 1111 Cloud Console. My name is Jack Bailey, thrilled to work with you today as we review the technology, the needs the customers have. My background in IT has been over for 20 years with roles in engineering, pre-sales, and enablement, and I'm thrilled to be your guest today. In terms of today's business climate, resiliency matters. True resiliency means having your data and applications available at all times, and downtime can have a significant impact to revenue, reputation, and competitive edge. 1111 has over 40 years of combined experience providing services globally with a huge focus on cloud services, connectivity, consulting, and managed security. We take a great amount of pride in our availability and support metrics, and our presence continues to grow in the Americas as well as EMEA and in APAC. Clearly, the market demand for DR is at an all-time high, but why is this so important? And how is positioning the usage of disaster recovery as a service different from backup? If you're less familiar with the differences in backup and DR, the next few slides may help you better understand the use cases for each. It's worth noting before we get into backup versus DR that these aren't at odds with each other, but rather are complementary to a customer's overall strategy of data resilience and data recovery. The way we like to look at 1111 systems is that all organizations have a need related to the production hosting their platform, in which live mission critical data serves customers' needs and applications. Disaster recovery or replication is typically a smaller window of time in terms of the data stored, but offers fast failover to another site. Backup and offsite backup typically keep data for longer periods of time for retention windows or compliance purposes, and then archive is typically meant for very long-term retention and recovery purposes. But let's break that down in a little bit more detail for you. So thinking about backup as a service versus DR as a service, let's start with an example of backup as a service. Now, it's worth noting 1111 systems does not protect customers' iPhones, but this analogy typically makes this a very straightforward topic to walk through. Imagine for a moment, if you're an iPhone user or even an Android user, that you have photos on your phone and you lose one of those photos and you need to get it back. This isn't a disaster scenario, but typically more associated with one of getting data back to where it belongs or a backup restore. In this case, if I was on my phone here, I could grab that photo out of iCloud. I could have access to it in a very quick period of time back to that source environment, which was my iPhone. When we think about what 1111 Systems provides our customers, our backup as a service offering is very similar to that previous slide, in which if a customer loses mission critical data in their source environment, they can use the data stored with us in a secure, encrypted, immutable fashion back to their original environment to be able to have access to that data again. The key emphasis here when we're talking about backup as a service is the source environment. That's ultimately where we're trying to restore data to. Let's go back to that cell phone analogy again. And again, we don't protect cell phones here, but this is maybe a helpful way of thinking of it. If in the scenario before we were talking about backup and I lost a photo and grabbed it from iCloud, in the scenario of the cell phone, a DR scenario would be more related to that phone falling in the ocean, being run over by your car in the parking lot. The phone is no longer available for usage by you. But when we talk about your customers here, what we're really talking about is not obviously cell phones, but instead production environments that host mission critical data and applications. And if we think about a DR scenario, what we're really talking about is a scenario in which their production environment is no longer available to serve up content to customers, to end users and employees. And that could happen from a number of different threats. Some of the more common ones that your customers are talking about and that people are thinking about from an end user perspective these days is malware, malicious insiders, and of course things like natural disasters and hackers. But malware or ransomware is on a lot of organizations' minds, and malicious insiders is also this idea of good employees maybe getting their credentials stolen and doing damage. But all of these different threats can cause harm to IT systems and ultimately take production sites offline. So the question has to be, what can you do to help protect your environment? And in this specific scenario, this is where DR can really provide a lot of value. If we think about the goals that a lot of IT organizations we talk to have when it comes to disaster recovery, typically the largest one, maybe the most straightforward one, is eliminating downtime for the various reasons I just walked you through, right? An IT organization says, hey, I'm worried about ransomware, I'm worried about hardware failure, natural disasters. I want to make sure that I have a secondary site should the need arise. But your organizations, like many others, may be thinking of a myriad of other needs for disaster recovery. And another really common one is compliance or cyber insurance. So let's talk through that briefly. Depending on the industry that your organization's in, specifically in healthcare, retail, financial, or many other compliance-driven industries, many times the ability to preserve and recover data is a big part of a compliance requirement. So your organization may need to have disaster recovery. But a lot of organizations are also looking to mitigate risk, right? Part of it is having a strategy of recovering, but another part of this may be the financial impact of a downtime event and how they could recoup those losses. So a lot of IT organizations are saying, how can I do cyber insurance? However, if you've looked at this recently, you may have discovered cyber insurance is more difficult to qualify for, more expensive and more complex than ever before. A lot of organizations, when they apply for cyber insurance, actually need to prove that they have systems, processes, and people in place that allow for successful prevention and recovery. Obviously, an insurer wants to make sure you have systems to help with that. We also run into a lot of organizations where they've invested in this, but they continue to have failures, they continue to throw money at this, and it's really blocking a broader strategy of how they're going to move more to the cloud and how they make all this work. So when we think about disaster recovery and what it can provide for an organization, where it should fill major gaps, disaster recovery is really becoming a must-have for all the reasons we talked about before. The threats continue to get larger. The impact to an organization from a financial, compliance, or customer retention perspective can continue to get worse. But traditional disaster recovery continues to prove itself to be a very wasteful, non-effective approach to this challenge. And cloud provides a much better fit. Let's talk through why this is the case briefly. If we think about a traditional approach to disaster recovery, this is where an IT organization says, hey, in order to ensure that I can always power my applications and mission critical data, I'm going to set up a secondary environment to allow me to recover to it, where that environment effectively looks like the original, but this introduces a lot of challenges. If we think back to that cell phone analogy before, this is the equivalent of having two phones available just in case you lose one or drop one, right? It's typically not very effective, but it's even more impactful in the IT world, obviously, where you have to make a compromise right up front. Are you going to buy enough infrastructure to allow for the full failover and full power of your production guests, or are you going to cut corners or use old hardware? Either way, you're either overspending or have an underpowered environment. Big compromise. Your staff members have a secondary site that they have to manage. And this is very complicated, as many organizations have people strapped thin for time and resources as it is to power a production environment. How do you cover a secondary environment and make that work? And then, of course, performance limitations is a big concern with this as well, as a lot of IT organizations have growth in terms of their data footprint and applications of nearly doubling every 2 to 3 years, depending on the industry and depending on the organization. This is also further compounded by recent changes with licensing from certain vendors in the hypervisor space that make it even more costly to have a secondary site. So obviously, this doesn't work for a lot of organizations. Their goal is uptime, but at what cost? At what impact to their organization? And so cloud is a much better fit for this. And with 1111 systems, the goal is to say, hey, let us provide on-demand resources where you only pay for what you need when you need it. How can we help eliminate management? So we could say, hey, instead of your staff or your team members having to prioritize and focus on multiple environments from a patching, health, validation perspective, What if 1111 can manage the entire stack of that secondary site to help ensure not only reduce full-time employee focus, but also help with the validation and the success? More to come on that in a moment. And then, of course, the promise of the cloud is to be able to scale with you and provide capacity on demand. And that's exactly what we're providing with our offerings here. So let's take a look at what this actually means for you. In many cases, when organizations look at the cloud, it can offer them great outcomes, but in many cases, it also comes with a lot of question marks on what does this actually cost? How do I make this predictable? Where can I actually show that there's a value of moving this way for my business and I'm not going to have surprises? You may have experienced or you may have heard of people that have moved to the cloud and have had surprise bills that are dozens of pages long with a lot of charges that they can't explain, and they have a lot of surprises related to their overall spend. With 1111 systems, it's an incredibly straightforward process. Typically, our DR as a service proposals and contracts with customers are a handful of line items that are very well spelled out in the sense of ongoing costs are typically just the storage needed for replication and the licensing for the underlying data replication technology to make them successful. Included with that storage and licensing costs, we have unlimited bandwidth, virtual machine firewalls powered by VMware within our infrastructure, end-to-end encryption, core security, and our 1111 Cloud Console, which I'll walk you through in a moment. During a failover event, we bill hourly for the resources used for CPU and RAM to make sure that it's incredibly granular, very, very cost-effective based on usage in a very fair period of time. And that's the way billing works. So most customers that move over to us have a handful of line items on their proposal and contract and completely can understand what they're paying for, why, and see the value to their organization. Now, that being said, while we've talked through a lot of the challenges related to setting up environments, replacing secondary sites, removing a lot of the management and making this more cost effective, the experience that your organization has when it comes to DR and making this successful is a really important experience to talk through. So what I'll do here for a moment is I'm going to share out my screen and walk you through an actual demonstration of what a recovery looks like with 1111 when it comes to disaster recovery. So here you can see what we call the 1111 Cloud Console. If this is your first time seeing this, I'd highly recommend that you join some of our other 30-minute tech sessions where we walk through this under other categories. But our goal for the 1111 Cloud Console is to unify all of the various things that IT organizations need to do related to data protection and production hosting into a single interface. So whether it's backup, 365 protection, disaster recovery as we're about to walk through, production hosting, or even object storage, we have a single interface to help manage all those environments. But more importantly, not just for the 1111 resources, but the various vendors and technologies we work with. Let me show you why this matters and why this is important to your success and the experience you have when you fail over. So if we look at an environment in which a customer is doing disaster recovery to 1111, after replication is configured and set up, which can be fully managed by us or managed by your team, depending on the needs of your solution, we have a continuity tab within our dashboard here. And this allows for a customer to have, on a self-service basis or a fully managed basis with 1111, a failover wizard invoked. And the idea behind this failover wizard is to make it as simple as possible to gain access to the data and applications for a couple of use cases. One of these use cases is validation. How can I make it easier to test without disrupting production guests? How can I do this in an isolated manner where I can do so during working hours, anytime, any day, to validate that it's working correctly? Or if I have an actual DR event, how can I get my end users cut over as quickly as possible to live resources? We also make it very easy to say, what's the granularity needed? If you've experienced a DR event before, typically the less you can fail over and the less changes you make, the faster the failover and the less disruptive it is. So in our console, we make it possible to fail over individual guests and applications or entire sites, depending on the need of the DR event. In this case, I'll simply fail over an individual application. But you may also know that granularity in terms of what you fail over, but when you fail over to, is also critical. With a lot of IT challenges related to DR events, think in terms of some of the risks I showed before. Corruption, encryption, and deletion are some of the leading causes of disaster recovery events. So the latest point in time may not be the healthy point in time. Because of this, we make it very easy for an organization to rewind back to a previous point in time, typically in terms of minutes or seconds, depending on configurations and technology use, to reduce data loss as granularly as possible, but still allow for a very specific point in time to be selected. Now, that being said, in this case, I'm going to do an actual live failover to a specific point in time, but I could have just as easily have done isolated testing or validation along the way. I'll click submit, and the idea behind the 1111 Cloud Console is to reduce the number of touches that a customer has to do to get successful DR failover. So I'm not going to need to log into a third-party software tool to begin failover. I'm not going to need to log into a different networking interface. I'm not going to need to log into a different virtualization layer. I can do all this through the 1111 Cloud Console. So let's take a look at this in action. Most customers find that with the DR tools that 1111 provides to them, the average failover time per virtual machine is roughly a minute per virtual guest to bring them into the environment, depending, of course, on boot order, boot delays, other things like that. But once the guests have been failed over into our environment, you can then access these guests as though they're normal, live, VMware-powered virtual machines, which is what they are. And if you think back to what we said a moment ago, up until this moment, all that I would have been paying for is just the storage and any other resources I've subscribed to. Only now that I've failed over am I paying for live CPU and RAM. So incredibly fast, responsive failover, but also very, very efficient from a billing and spend perspective as well. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like. While 1111 provides a number of DR options, including disaster recovery for AWS, Azure, different source platforms, what we're looking at right now is our VMware-powered environments that 1111 runs globally for our customers. And this means that from a VMware source environment into ours, fewer changes occur and a massive speed and success occurs for a customer. It also means that for your teams logging into this environment, they know how to use it right away because it looks and feels like your local environment. I, as an IT admin, can actually come in and change the resources this guest has access to, create additional copies of it, do daily maintenance on it, or even interact with it from a keyboard, video, and mouse perspective for troubleshooting or isolated testing. So there's a lot of value that's provided by this console in terms of empowering your team members to use their existing skill sets, but have faster success with us as well. Now, we talked earlier about the need for end user access and making that scalable. Within the 1111 Cloud Console, we actually have built-in virtual networking appliances, which allows for our customers to come in and pre-configure firewall rules, VPN configuration, IP policies, other network settings, so that during a failover, everything is pre-configured in advance or as much as possible to make it a more seamless cutover experience for their customers. So a great capability there. Now, a couple final things that I want to show in terms of the disaster recovery experience here. You'll notice I did a live failover and it says it's waiting on user input. When a customer fails over into 1111, we have the ability for them to commit and begin reverse replication so they can fail back to their original environment in a timely manner, or to cancel the failover and either pick a different point in time or cancel it altogether. We want our customers to feel very confident of initiating failover, knowing that they have options when it comes to the point in time and the success criteria they have. I'm going to go ahead and click commit here. And what this will do is actually tell the 1111 Cloud Console that I'm fully committed to failing over into our environment, begin reverse replication, and start preparing me for failback when that original environment is healthy. One final thing that I'll do real quick as part of this demo here is I can also generate reporting which shows really great details around how long did this take, who kicked off the failover, what steps occurred along the way here, what results did I get, and who signed off on it. So end-to-end, a really great, robust visualization that if you are in a compliance-driven organization or industry, can be really valuable as part of your run book, part of your audit book, to show for cyber insurance or compliance purposes that you have what you need in place there. So to the audience today, that's hopefully a very succinct but effective demo to show you a little bit more about what our platform actually provides in terms of resources and capabilities to get you up and running. Now, we've talked about a lot so far, so as we begin wrapping up today, I'd like to cover a few details as part of a recap in a little bit more detailed capacity here. So when I think about organizations that I've worked with in the past and worked in as part of a team in the past, I typically find that businesses want to make a move for one of three reasons, right? To reduce risk, to optimize spend, or generate more revenue. So I'd love to wrap up today by talking a little bit about what the 1111 DR as a service offering can do for you as an organization. The first thing that we do is help reduce risk, and this is obviously a given. We're talking about disaster recovery, so we're really hoping to reduce downtime here. But as you probably saw through that demo and through my slide recap, we can reduce data loss down into minutes and seconds, depending on the technology used and some of the configuration settings. So really get very fast failover capabilities. As I walked you through in the demo a moment ago, it's possible to set up plans or replication structure to do individual applications or even entire environments to allow for granularity and effectiveness of failover. You saw in the demo, it only takes a matter of a couple minutes to actually do a failover into our environment, depending on some of the settings there. And the ability to do testing or live failover can really help with that confidence level. And confidence is really critical when it comes to data protection. It's not enough just to have a plan. It needs to be a validated plan. You need to ensure that you understand how end users are going to access things. Did you protect the right applications? And the only way to truly know is to actually do testing. So our console is really designed to power that experience, or our fully managed options are meant to really complement that with the expertise 1111 can provide. When it comes to optimizing spend or saving money, hopefully you've seen through the presentation today that our goal is to eliminate any sort of secondary site costs, the infrastructure, the full-time employee focus, other things like that, and really refine this down to paying for only what you need as you need it, with both the way that our contracts and quoting works, but also the way that our on-demand access to CPU, RAM, and other resources work as well. And then, of course, in terms of your organization generating revenue or driving revenue, I always like to say every organization needs DR to be in business, but very few organizations are in the business of DR. It's a really interesting thing to have a team that maybe has some generalists or people that focus on one IT capacity try to set up disaster recovery. It's a very specialized capability, and we find that we can do it very well for our customers and allow for them to focus on revenue generating activities, to instead work on driving value for their customers and work on competitive advantages rather than infrastructure and IT hosting. And we see time and time again, that's a greater use of your employees' times, and allowing for our 40+ years of IT expertise and experience, working with some of the best vendors in the space, and all we bring is the largest service provider for disaster recovery to your table as well. So if you're thinking about what we can do to get started here, 1111 has a tool set that we've built in-house called Catalyst. And this is a tool that allows us to look and say, what would the amount of resources look like on our end to protect your environment? How can we show you with a greater degree of accuracy what you would need to subscribe to meet your DR goals, both from an ongoing replication and a failover perspective? But cost is only part of the equation when it comes to going to the cloud. I also like to think in terms of compatibility and connectivity. So what 1111 can do working with you is also using the same tool, we can see if there are any red flags that would delay or reduce the likelihood of DR success into our infrastructure. We can work through those in a pre-sales capacity and help you more streamline that process. When it comes to connectivity, we can do site testing to see if the replication capabilities you have at your sites will meet your replication goals when it comes to your change rate, your frequency of replication, or even your end user access. And then we can more accurately predict for you what the testing will look like from an ad hoc basis, what failover will look like, and whether or not you can meet some of those goals you have when it comes to data protection. So team, I know we covered a lot today. It's one thing to see, to hear, but it's also another thing to get your hands on the technology. So I would encourage you, if you saw something today, there's a lot of different ways to work with us, but if you prefer to get more hands-on or test things out as part of your buying process or validation process, you can scan the QR code on the screens, or you can go to 1111systems.com/DR as a service -free -trial. That's DRaaS -free -trial to try out an 1111 disaster recovery solution for 30 days, or work with our team to get more details along the way. So team, I know we covered a lot of ground today. I'd love to thank you for joining us. I hope you gained a deeper understanding of the 1111 Systems disaster recovery, how this can help you scale your organization's and cloud storage needs. I encourage you to use that QR code or reach out to us for more details, or join us for a future session on the topics of backup, other storage topics, production hosting. I want to thank you for your time and attendance and hope you have a great day. Take care, everyone.